Equidistant from the North Sea and the Mediterranean, in the very heart of the European continent, lies the former Czechoslovakia. It split into two states, and the Czech Republic became independent in 1993, with Prague as its capital. Prague is part of Bohemia, a geographical and historical entity whose origins go back to the Middle Ages. An extraordinary heritage is the pride of this country, which today is modernized, and which for a long time was the only democracy in Central Europe. In one of the richest urban regions of Europe, the city of Prague has stood for over 1,000 years on the banks of the river Vltava. The castle and the cathedral overlook the town, and the river is crossed by a great number of bridges, like the famous Charles Bridge. The continental climate is sometimes extreme in a town which seems to huddle beneath its roofs. Prague is laid out to a complex, typically medieval street plan, from which dozens of churches reach skywards. A characteristic which has given rise to the name the City of 100 Spires. At the crossroads of various European routes and of many different influences, the town's architecture is very eclectic, and the Baroque rubs shoulders with the bold avant-garde. Prague, in fact, has put on many different faces during its history. The face of the Nazis appeared in 1938 and stayed until the end of the Second World War. The face of Soviet communism. At that time, it was compulsory to learn Russian at school. For 40 years, and almost without interruption, society and the life of the whole country were dominated by Big Brother Russia. A gigantic monument was raised to the glory of Stalin, a glory that turned out to be quite ephemeral. The face of a brief revolution crushed by Moscow. The Soviet intervention was felt here like a brutal assault. The face of dashed hopes, and then freedom in 1989. A giant metronome erected on the plinth of the Stalinian monument measures the passing of time and of regimes. Only the haggard faces of the victims remain in place. Today, the values of communism are laughed at. The Czech Republic has 10 million inhabitants, and 1/10 of the nation's population are in the capital. It's a population heavily influenced by Western culture.
We are very happy.
Czech culture is present on every stage. It's expressed in the street and in the most prestigious places. But wherever that culture takes shape, it does so in a mixture of styles, genres, and periods. Culture in the city of Prague is borne by illustrious names. Franz Kafka is one of them, and is certainly one of the major writers of the 20th century. Another great name of Czech culture is exhibited in the museum devoted to him, Alphonse Mucha. He used a special technique. He photographed his many models, including his wife, before painting them very true to life. His portraits form a seductive encyclopedia of feminine elegance at the end of the 19th century. Mucha became famous in Paris, first in print. With his sweeping lines, Mucha is one of the prime exponents of Art Nouveau. Art is everywhere in Prague. And with the freedom to express itself on all subjects and in every medium, artistic creation gives the city a real personality. The provocative sculptor David Czerny can even deride his country by casting in bronze his very personal opinions. Yes, art is everywhere. It disrupts proportions and changes perspectives. But the finest example of artistic vitality is provided by the architecture. The town was spared the massive destruction of the Second World War, and so a remarkable heritage has survived intact. Through the history of its architecture, all the great periods are represented in Prague's carefully preserved buildings. Moreover, the town planning decisions taken were never too risky. The result brings out a harmony in spite of the differences. Religious faiths also express themselves in a country where religious practice is the weakest in Europe, which doesn't prevent the diversity of worship. The Czechs are keener on practicing the religion of sport. In Prague alone, there are two great clubs that spark people's passion. Sparta and Slavia are, of course, rivals. Public transport starts running very early. There are even some trams that run all night. It's even better to take the metro if you want to get around. It's quick and simple. In Prague, more people use the metro than any other form of transport. The town looks after its colors. It looks after its heritage and its equipment, even at night. The capital gets very little respite because it exerts a very strong force of attraction over the whole country. Prague is a very busy crossroads for traffic, and everything is done to discourage vehicles from coming into the historic center, which is often snarled up. Four million tourists visit Prague every year, a figure that is rising and is equal to 4 times the town's population. This is an influx that justifies the determination to give the streets back to the pedestrian. It also explains the success of alternative means of transport. The city respects its past and is renovating it very successfully. It even gives a new life to some real national legends. Vladimir Kozubik.
This original model Skoda was built in 1931, and this car is an original model.
The Vltava is the vital artery in Prague. Indeed, very early on, the town grew on both sides of the river. It made it possible to trade with the outside world. It's an affluent of the Elbe that flows into the North Sea. Fed by water from the river, a man-made canal flows into the town. The mills were used for grinding corn. At first, people had to cross the river by a ford. The first bridge, the Charles Bridge, was built in the 14th century, and for 4 centuries was the town's only bridge. The bridge is always swarming with visitors. This is the price of success for such a symbolic place that is known and recognized throughout the world. There are street vendors and artists of every kind on the Charles Bridge. Here, imagination and relaxation are the order of the day. Touching some of the bronze statues brings good luck. The Charles Bridge was a strategic point in Prague. At each end, there's a Gothic tower that guarded the access to the bridge. From the tops of the towers, there's an uninterrupted view of the town's rooftops. On Wenceslas Square, everyone stops to look at the equestrian statue of the famous Duke of Bohemia. He is highly venerated by the Czechs. Assassinated by his own brother, he was the country's first martyr. Jan Palach also died a martyr. This is where he set fire to himself in protest against the Soviet invasion in 1969. He was 21. Wenceslas Square is lined with buildings offering a surprising mixture of architectural styles. The square that was once a horse market has become a highly important heritage center. The town's architecture encourages various vocations. But there are other reasons for the diversity of styles. Michel Caoud teaches architecture.
Architects and builders coming from different regions of Europe. We have people coming from France, like Matthias of Arras. We had builders coming from Germany. We had builders coming from a lot. There was an influx, constant influx of people coming from Italy. So you have many influences here.
Wenceslas Square is sometimes compared to the Champs-Élysées. It's almost a kilometer long and is indeed more like an avenue than a square. Near the square, people of the high society used to frequent the Lucerna Palace, a masterpiece of late Art Nouveau from the first half of the 20th century. Covered arcades were very much in vogue. It was designed in its entirety by the architect grandfather of Václav Havel, the great Czech writer and statesman. In towns that were built in the Middle Ages, the dimensions of the streets are sometimes surprising. Pedestrians are warned before entering the narrowest street in Prague. It's not possible for two pedestrians to pass each other. You have to alternate the traffic and ask for permission to go through. Behind the renovated facade of a former barracks, an ultra-modern commercial center has been built. Preserving the historical heritage while at the same time modernizing the town is one of the major preoccupations of town planners. Like everywhere else, commercial centers are mushrooming in Prague. Contemporary architecture looks for new lines. In the Karlin district, some buildings have opted for the slim line. Back to the values of the country. The old industrial suburb has today taken on the appearance of a small provincial town. With its fresh produce, the Karlin market also offers many articles of craftwork. All the flavors of the Czech countryside and traditional recipes are found on the stalls. This is the chance to taste food that is quite unusual.
I'm selling pumpkins and soup of pumpkins. Very good, very healthy. Do you know what is it? Radish, Chinese radish. Very aphrodisiac.
Meat and charcuterie have a very important place in the diet of the Czech people. Pork is prepared with many different sauces.
This is a pork turnover. It's grilled pork with sauerkraut in a potato pancake.
It's far from light, but it is so good. In the pastry line, the Czechs also have a vast repertoire. Even their Austrian and Hungarian neighbors have borrowed a few ideas from them. For regulars at the Karlin market, Grandma's good old recipes are the most sought after.
These are traditional cakes made from Magdalena Dobromila Retogova's recipes. You have to prepare the yeast first and then the dough, which you allow to rise 4 times.
It's difficult to keep your figure in Prague, and curves can follow the creative urge. The dancers Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers inspired the dancing house. Speaking of celebrities, Beethoven lived on Knights of Malta Square. The famous soldier monks owned a priory there in the middle of the 12th century. In the Middle Ages, merchants were already well established in the arcades. Today, artists and craftsmen carry on the tradition. In Prague, art is also in the street. On one of the walls of the Grand Priory Square, an anonymous artist drew the portrait of John Lennon shortly after his death in 1980. The pacifist ideas of the famous Beatle didn't please the communist authorities, and the portrait was erased. But it very soon reappeared. Every time it was erased, it reappeared straight away. Since then, things have changed, and the wall is permanently covered with messages of tolerance, love, and liberty. The town is rich with symbols, and people in love adore them. A little bridge over the canal is one such symbol. Prague is a romantic town. It's also a photogenic town, and many places lend themselves to daydreaming. The town has inspired many artists, painters, musicians, writers, and film directors. Prague is open to artistic creation in all fields. Marionette theatre has an important place. It's a medium for the national language, a whole different aspect of culture. Sara Aksamitova.
So marionettes has a very long history, because when in history was true people poor, they take a piece of wood and carve some marionette and play the performance or sell them.
The marionettes are made from a variety of very different materials.
These marionettes are made from more material. One of the material is wood or plaster or the ceramic, and they are very difficult to make.
In a carpentry workshop, the tools can also be turned to different uses. Martin Rosica makes marionettes. It's a profession, but it's also his passion.
I mean, it's really different because, for example, the small ones, it's this small dead Joker or dead Pinocchio, for example, or even a live Pinocchio. And then I also make a live Joker. So I can make 6 pieces a week, but I mean, it depends. Of course, there are marionettes that take you 2 weeks to make, the big ones, and it's difficult mechanism to move, and like for professional playing.
You can see many different characters, but the most popular character is a jester, because it's a character or person who started every performance and introduce the show.
Don Giovanni, the famous opera, has been a success as a marionette show since 1991. Vltava.
The marionette theater is an ancient tradition in Czech countries, and it dates back to the time of the Czech National Revival. It exists everywhere in the Czech Republic. The world premiere of Don Giovanni, directed by Mozart himself, took place here in Prague at the State's Theater, just near here, and in 1990, they had the idea of putting on a shortened version with marionettes. We have a school that specializes in the art of the marionette. It's the higher school of alternative art and the art of the marionette. I got my diploma there. There's also the Academy of Performing Arts.
Rhythms and costumes from elsewhere. This Sunday, the island of Kampa is unusually lively. Some are concentrating on the exotic, and others on local traditions.
From the region called Horňácko, which is southern part of Moravia. It gathers together 10 small villages.
Moravia is a region in the east of the country. Many Moravian folk groups were created during the communist era. It was a way of conserving traditions, but also of upholding the regional identity. At the bottom of Wenceslas Square, craftsmen are keeping up other traditions. The Tredelnik of Skalika is a pastry cooked on a spit and spiced with cinnamon. Blacksmiths beat medieval coins. Today is the 28th of September, the Czech people's national day. It's St. Wenceslas Day. He was the country's first king, and they pay tribute to him with festivities dating from his time. You mustn't forget to polish the horse's hooves. Everything has to be perfect, down to the last detail. The king has come to make sure the people enjoy themselves.
Everyone going to have a good time in Prague today? We're going to play for you, to entertain you. St. Wenceslas was the Duke of Bohemia, but above all was the country's patron saint. Why is he so well known? Well, he did so much for the country and for his people. That's also why he was canonized.
Wenceslas reigned in the 10th century. The Czechs uphold his memory with recreations that are very realistic. Near the town, another historical recreation is more like a Hollywood super-production. For the young and old, the show attracts an audience that's mad keen on history and that loves piping hot Tredelnik. A great battle is about to take place. Martin Chulinsky.
Everything is ready for the reenactment of the battle. We've also organized a big market with a lot of entertainment all around it. There are more than 800 people taking part from all over Europe who play the artillery, the cavalry, the infantry, more than 250 musketeers. And there are also a lot of explosive effects.
After the blessing, hostilities may commence. They are reenacting the Battle of White Mountain in the 17th century, in which Catholics who had sided with the Emperor of Germany fought against Czech Protestants. The victory of the German Catholics put an end to the independence of Bohemia. It was the start of the terrible 30 Years' War. A historic defeat for the Czechs, but today a huge popular success.
Yes, I think that in the Czech Republic, historical reenactments are quite popular, as is history in general. Because of their geographical position, the Czech regions have always been at the heart of Europe. They've literally seen history march across their land many times. There was the 30 Years' War and many other conflicts.
It's also an opportunity to remember the part that France played in the history of Europe.
Malé portugalské, dnes na lásku prodejnou, do rána budeme pít, až s prvním svítáním krčmář svíce zhasne, hej! S rozhrkaným povozem, stav jsou většině prázdné.
Entry to Golden Lane is regulated because so many people flock here to walk down this well-known tiny street in Old Prague. Originally, the very small houses were reserved for the king's guards, but they have since had many different tenants, including some celebrities. Franz Kafka lived at number 22. Golden Lane owes its name to the alchemists who used to live there. They were seeking the secret of the philosopher's stone for the king and how to change lead into gold. The Protestant leaders beaten in the Battle of White Mountain were executed on the Old Town Square, one of the major historical sites in Prague. The square and the adjacent streets are also a veritable collection of architectural gems. The tower of the former town hall has housed a remarkable astronomical clock since the 15th century. Prague was a multicultural city, and 3 different times were shown: Bohemian time, German time, and Babylonian time. Every hour, different characters come to life around the clock. And at the top, behind 2 windows, the 12 apostles walk by with their symbols. After they were burnt at the end of the Second World War, the wooden statues were replaced. Antonin Balun.
Actually, in the medieval times, each city used to have one astronomical clock. This is the Prague clock. And in the medieval times, each person was able to read the symbolism of the clock, although nowadays it's kind of difficult.
Nearby, you can enter the buildings of the former town hall. The old town's independence was recognized from the 13th century. The district, where mainly wealthy merchants and upper middle classes lived, kept its autonomy for 5 centuries. On the town hall's clock tower, a trumpeter sounds the hour. This is a tradition that's come straight down from the Middle Ages.
In those days, people didn't have watches. So with the trumpet, they could know what time it was. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock.
There are plenty of landmarks on the square. like the Prague meridian drawn on the ground. The old town square is the place where all events take place, whether they are joyful or more momentous. There are several historic monuments around the square. It's a continuous procession through history, from one to the other. To protect its wealth, Prague was fortified. Access was only possible through gates like the Powder Tower. Inside, various collector's items seem to have come straight out of medieval times. The Powder Gate is an important vestige of the past. It was in fact very close to the palace of the kings of Bohemia, but this is no longer there. The Catholic Church used various methods in the fight against Protestant reform. One of the most spectacular was Baroque art. St. Nicholas Church is the finest example in Prague. In the Malá Strana district, Baroque is triumphant. Here we're a long way from the austerity of the Protestants. St. Nicholas Church is considered to be one of the great successes of Baroque and religious architecture in Europe. Organ concerts set the tone. The richness of the decor and the refinement are also very visible in a rather fashionable street. Paris Street. It's an appointment with elegance. The City of Gold lives up to its name in this district that is devoted to luxury shopping. Franz Kafka was born in the center of Prague. A museum has been set up in his memory. Here you can discover the life and work of an author who published very little during his lifetime. Indeed, he had asked one of his friends to destroy all his manuscripts. Kafka wrote in German because at that time his country was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His complex relationships with women and his conflicts with his father had a great influence on a body of work where the individual is crushed by overwhelming forces. An absurd and anonymous world where man remains forever misunderstood and finally excluded. You cannot visit the Prague of Kafka because that is a town that existed only in his mind. Kafka was Jewish, and his community is one of the oldest in Europe. The presence of Jews in the city has been recorded since the 9th century. And 9 centuries later, Prague was to become the biggest Jewish town in the Christian world. But the Jewish district that Kafka knew has changed a lot. The old ghetto has virtually disappeared, destroyed at the beginning of the 20th century for reasons of hygiene. The Spanish synagogue takes its inspiration from Moorish architecture. It shows the diversity of cultures within the same Jewish community. Very early on, Jews were obliged to identify themselves by wearing a distinctive sign. But contrary to popular belief, the Nazis did not invent the infamous yellow star. It already existed here in the middle of the 16th century. In the Pinkas synagogue, the walls are covered with many, many names. There are almost 80,000 of them. They are the names of all the country's Jews who fell victim to the Nazis. Nearby is the old Jewish cemetery. There are thousands of tombstones in a small area. Because of the lack of space, the tombs are very close to each other and are sometimes even piled up. Burials have been banned since the end of the 18th century. Prague Castle, at the top of the Hradčany Hill, reserves a musical welcome for visitors. All the national leaders, dukes, kings, emperors and presidents have had their headquarters in the castle. It is a prestigious place and one that commands respect, especially during the changing of the guard. This is a high-precision exercise that happens every hour. The uniforms were designed by the wardrobe master of the famous Czech film director Miloš Forman. Prague Castle is a vast complex where buildings of different styles and works of art are brought together on a hill overlooking the town. The site is easy to defend and has been inhabited since the dawn of time. Within the walls of the castle stands the St. Guy Cathedral, a masterpiece of Gothic art. It took nearly 6 centuries to build. While Romanesque art was trying to impress and frighten the faithful, Gothic art sought to seduce and educate them through historical or biblical scenes. The sculptures, as well as the very high stained glass windows, all have a didactic function. Two historical characters are buried in the cathedral. The Holy King Wenceslas, and in a solid silver tomb, St. John Nepomucene, who was martyred because he had protected the king's wife. The castle stretches for nearly 600 meters and is one of the biggest in the world. Below the castle, tribute is paid to the architect who designed the sumptuous gardens. The garden was originally a shooting range, but came to be used for holding open-air receptions. Here there's a presentation of birds of prey that live in the Czech forests. There are some very useful daytime and nocturnal predators.
This is a very beautiful tawny owl. It's my favorite. We can only touch it here because all the birds of prey, and all the owls also, have a special powder which is impermeable.
Prague Castle is also well known for its vineyard. The nature of the soil, the slope and the exposition are perfectly suited to the vine, which has been grown here since the 10th century. 2 grape varieties are grown, a white and a red. The red is a Pinot Noir from France. Originally, the grapes were used to make communion wine for the churches of Prague. Today, the local wine has many supporters. The Petrín hill is a haven of greenery in the middle of the town. A funicular railway goes up to the summit. The apparatus was installed at the end of the 19th century, but it has been renovated several times. The funicular partly owes its success to the amateur astronomers who like the remote open spot to carry out their nighttime observations. A metal tower has been erected at the summit, a smaller copy of the Eiffel Tower. But the people of Prague say that by adding the height of the hill to their tower, they beat the height of the tower in Paris. The Zizkov district has given its name to another tower. Huge crawling babies have been added by, of course, the sculptor David Czerny. The artist is omnipresent in Prague with quite often provocative works, but their humor provokes smiles more than disapproval. The Zizkov Tower is used for telecommunications and affords a panoramic view of the city. It dates from the 1980s during the Soviet period. At that time, people complained that it spoiled the view of the landscape, but they eventually got used to it. They also finally adopted the great chubby-cheeked babies. Lucie Cherna.
At the beginning, the babies were put there as an experiment to see how the public would react. And as they were quite popular, it was decided to leave them there permanently. It was Mr. Czerny who created them, who had the idea of putting them on the television tower.
Another peculiarity is the one-room hotel that has been created in the tower. It's a good idea to make a reservation. To come back down to earth is not far and is easily accomplished by metro. Both day and night, life in Prague is intense. The Black Theatre is a Czech tradition. It was invented in the 1950s. It's a mixture of traditional theatre, ballet, mime, and optical illusion. The optical effects lead the spectator into a world of fantasy that's full of surprises.
This kind of show exists elsewhere in the world, but it's in the Czech Republic that we took out a patent on what we call the line, that underlines the contour and gives form to the subject.
At the end of the show, the artists reveal to the audience the techniques they use. It's a simple but effective way of creating dreams. Prague has a feeling for entertainment. Czech theatre is intimately linked to the country's identity. It's even one of its emblems. After all, the statesman Václav Havel was first known as a playwright. On the Prague stage, dancing is so exuberant that it spills out onto the streets. The concert halls in Prague have received the greatest Czech composers like Dvořák and Smetana. Monuments of the music world have come in person to conduct their works. Richard Strauss, Gustav Mahler, and Mozart himself. The Italian Giuseppe Verdi never went to Prague, but his Rigoletto always features in the operatic repertoire. When night falls on Wenceslas Square, the show is in the street. In a set composed of gems of architecture, street performers step into the spotlight. In the area around the square, there's no shortage of places to be entertained. Beer flows freely, and sometimes the pumps are set up on the tables. The Czechs are said to be the greatest beer drinkers in the world, and beer is part of their culture. Beer was brewed in this country before the year 1000, and the industry produced most of the income for the towns. It is said that here, ordinary beer costs less than water. Some breweries are part of the national heritage. Ladislav Vesely.
Czech Republic, because it's old.
This is a very old establishment, and we used old technology, like old barrels such as these, and fermentation vats made of oak. I think it's interesting because nobody uses this technique anymore, except perhaps a very few breweries.
The bars try to outdo each other with ways to attract the customer. Here, you get served by an electric train. Not only does the train bring the full glasses, it takes away the empties. As a throwback to the Soviet era, there are always fans of Cuban music. But the revolution is a thing of the past. And now Prague drinks to the icons of communism and forgetting them. The Soviet era is part of the scenery. It's now seen as ancient history. Night is almost endless in Prague, and there are plenty of places to live it to the full. As for music, the town does it on a big scale. Wenceslas Square, 1 o'clock in the morning. It's the moment to relax to a little jazz. Even in the middle of the night, the town bears the marks of its long history. In the soft light, all the ages seem to blend. But Prague will always follow the course of its river, as it reflects the very heart of Europe.